Oke. I'm on AGRA's inaugural podcast. Transforming Africa's food systems is what I care deeply about as a journalist. And my one piece of advice I would give to people who are transforming Africa's food systems is to go where you're celebrated and wanted, not where you're tolerated. So those rooms, those convenings, those conventions where Africa is a side note, or we have one African or maybe two Africans, that isn't a celebration of what we can bring to the table. So go where we are celebrated, not where we're tolerated. Is that radical?
Well, hello, listeners and friends. Welcome to the AGRA Podcast. I'm so excited to have the discussion I'm about to have today with someone I've looked up to for a while. So it's going to be great to learn from her. But before we dive into that discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am, just so that you know who the voice is that is bringing you this discussion. My name is Khanyi Mlaba. I'm based in South Africa, and I work at Global Citizen. I am so deeply thrilled to have the discussion that we're about to have about storytelling and how to translate African storytelling onto the world stage with none other than Femi Oke, who is an award-winning international journalist, broadcaster, podcaster, and co-founder of Moderate the Panel, with a career spanning Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, NPR. Femi is renowned for making complex global issues accessible to everybody worldwide. She brings a journalist's instinct for clarity and a moderator's skill for connecting people to big ideas and global issues, essential for Africa's food systems discussions. Femi, I'm so honored to be speaking with you today. How are you doing?
I am very warm. If you see a little bit of, a little bit of Dakar glow, it's because it's quite hot in the studio, but it's really good to see and really good to be here.
It was good to be with you. And honestly, everyone's got a bit of Dakar glow. So, we're joined in that same space.
Yeah.
So before we get into the deeper discussion here, we have some fast and furious questions. Just a little bit of fun. We love to have a little bit of fun
Go
to kick
for
things
it.
off. Okay.
All right,
I love
I'm ready.
it.
I'm ready.
You ready for a challenge? I'm here for it. Okay. So can you tell me, what is your best food memory?
All right. So I was working in Ghana. And I was doing a story for CNN. So this was many years ago. And we went into really deep agriculture areas. And I was in a little hut. And people said, we're about to have dinner, but you're not going to want to eat this. And I said, well, what are you eating? Like rice ball. And I was like, okay, rice ball. What's rice ball? So everyone is sitting on the floor. And I sat on the floor, washed their hands. And they started eating with their hands, and then they opened up the pot, and it was what we call in Nigeria ground rice. And it was red stew and vegetable stew. And as a little kid, we would all eat Nigerian food with our hands around the big table. So I literally sat on the floor, cross-legged, ate rice ball, which is ground rice in Nigeria. And I just felt, because of the way that our food travels around the world, travels around our continent, that just because some colonialist says this part of the world is Ghana, this part of the world is Nigeria, it doesn't mean that our food stops at those boundaries, right? Our food goes right across all of those boundaries. And there was such joy for me to sit on the ground as an adult, eat with my hand, and then everybody who was sitting in the hut was like looking at me like, this CNN journalist is eating with her hands and sitting on the floor. But I thank my mum and dad for teaching me to eat Nigerian food the way that they ate Nigerian food, which was with their hands. And so that was just a great, it was a memory for me, because I didn't know that in Ghana, ground rice is called rice ball. And I learned that, but I also felt so comfortable being on my continent because the way that my parents brought me up. I'm a child of the diaspora. I was born in London, mate, South London. But I'm very much a daughter of Nigeria, West Africa, and the African continent. So you can take the Nigerian out of Africa, but you can't take the Africa out of a Nigerian. So that was the rice ball story, knowing that rice ball and ground rice are exactly the same food, and the joy of eating with your hands when you're a sophisticated CNN journalist. That I will never forget that moment. And also seeing the shock on the villagers' faces when they saw me. And they're like, oh. She's eating with her hands. Very impressive. So I love that. I love that.
I love that too. And you know what I love about that story is that it really reminds us that regardless of like how separated we are, like, you know, across these borders and these lines, really there's food really brings us together. And even if it's foods that we're unfamiliar with as a Southern African person coming to West Africa, they are foods that I can relate to even if I've not seen them before. And I think that's such a stunning thing.
Yeah, because pap for me,
yes,
it's not, I find it hard to eat because when you eat pap, which is not dissimilar to ground rice, you know, where it's made. You know, you have to know how to turn pap.
You really do.
Right?
You got to work those muscles just to get into it.
So when I got lots of South African friends and my best friend is South African, so she will make pap. But if I eat pap, I can't eat anything for the whole day.
It's true. Pap will make you sleep. Pap will make you sleep. You have a good pap. Like you literally, if you have pap, you must have no other plans for the day.
Ever.
You must just knock yourself out and, you know that you're having nothing to, you're going to be lethargic for the rest of the day.
But think about pap, and it's so far south on the continent.
Yes.
And ground rice and eba or rice ball in Ghana is very similar cooking process. And that connection, like when I see pap, I think of what I used to eat when I was a kid with my parents.
I love that connectivity, no matter what, no matter how they try to separate us, we really do come back together in our best ways. So speaking about like, you know, going across borders, in your opinion, in your view, what dish do you think best represents the continent?
All right, I am a diplomat.
Okay.
I'm not even going to say jollof rice, right? Because, you know, that joke is old. Everyone knows that Nigerians have the best jollof rice. So there is no debate about that.
Okay, I'm not going to say anything.
But the diplomatic answer, and the one that I truly believe is, it's not a dish, it's our flavors. Wherever you go on the continent, the flavor, the seasoning of the food is so special and delicious.
Yeah.
And I feel that is more important than a dish, because otherwise it makes us sound like we're a country.
It's true.
Africa is not a country, it's a
Africa's
continent.
not.
And it's huge. How can you have a dish that represents an entire continent? But the flavors of our continent, rich, diverse, delicious, I feel like that is the diplomatic and truly, for me, the honest answer.
And I do think that's a stunning answer because it reminds us that we don't just eat food with our taste buds. We eat food with so much that the aromas, the flavors come through the aromas and what you're putting into the food, you know, through the textures, just as you were talking about rice ball, the textures, and like there's so much with your eyes. You're eating so much of our you know, local foods with all of who you are. It's not just, you know, the food that's right in front of you. You know, devour it.
Sure.
You take so much from it. The last Fast and Furious question I have for you, although
I'm not being very fast and furious. I'm like, you're being fast and I'm just taking my time.
But I enjoy it. Usually you're on this side. So, you know, I'm the one who's keeping pace. You're the one who can just relax, you know, enjoy the conversation, and I'll join the ride with you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great. So the last question I have for you, especially since you're so proud of your Nigerian heritage, if I were to open a food basket with, you know, with your cultural food inside, what would I find?
Okay. So I'm going to put in this basket. I'm very selfish. I'm just going to put in things that I love.
Of course.
So yam, plantain. I'd actually just have plantain.
Yum. Yum, 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 yum.
Plantain and oils. I can fry the plantain. But let me be a little bit more encompassing. So plantain, oil, tomatoes, because some of the sauces and the stews are tomato based. Pepper. Got to have some pepper. And then fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, those oranges that you get in the street. Oh, so delicious.
Nothing better than getting like really good fresh produce from those who are like locally harvesting them and then finding them on the street on your way to your next commute. Oh, I know exactly what you mean. I'm just like tasting like a good juicy like orange. Oof, yum.
So good.
Delicious. Let's get into the discussion now. We're going to talk a little bit about storytelling and you know, how you've been able to get eyes on the African continent through the work that you do. So let's start with this question here that I have for you. As a journalist, what two changes have you noticed in how Africa's food systems are covered? And if I could further that question, can you share an anecdote where better storytelling has changed the course of food or agriculture issues?
So I'm going to say straight off, technology, computers, apps, immediately have changed the way that agriculture and agribusiness is being done on the continent. And then the second impact would be climate change, because let me go back to when I was at CNN. So we're going back to 1999 to 2008, and I joined CNN as a meteorologist, as a weather forecaster. And so I was seeing climate change happening in real time. I was seeing the rains that should be in East Africa. They weren't there one season. I was seeing the rains that should be going further north. It didn't go further north. And so the farmers were missing out on the seasonal rain. Their crops were being impacted. So this is almost 20 years ago. So our African farmers knew about climate change. In fact, farmers, full stop, know about climate change. They knew about climate change while we were still, or scientists were still trying to persuade the rest of the world that it was a real thing. And 20 years ago, people were having debates. Is climate change real? Can we affect the climate? While our farmers in East Africa were saying, yes, we know already. We're missing. And I'd say, oh, we have a drought here. We have another drought here. And I was saying this as a forecaster, knowing that year after year after year, that is climate. One season is just weather, but repetitive lack of rain is climate change. And our African farmers knew this many years ago. And I think that truly has impacted how agriculture is being done, the future of agriculture, the future of agribusiness, the future of farming on the continent has been truly impacted by climate change over the world, but of course here on our mother continent. So that has been a big change. Let me tell you about storytelling then in connection with that. The Africa Climate Summit was last year. The first edition was in Nairobi, and it was packed. People were flying from all over the continent. They wanted to be there. People were flying with no visas. It's like, it's all right. I'm going to get in. I'm going to get into Nairobi. It was, Kenya was overwhelmed because what was happening? We were telling our own story. We were not waiting for COP to maybe talk about developing countries. We'll maybe talk about Africa's challenges, maybe talking about the climate change impacts that weren't caused by African farmers or Africans, but were caused by the West. And so year after year after year, I think this is the part of COP that is very stressful, is that people who are most impacted by COP go to COP expecting the very best. Oh my goodness, they're so resilient because, and I don't want to say this before the next COP, but our expectations, actually, they're not quite so high anymore. Our expectations are like here.
Yeah, quite true.
And then at the end, it's like, what did we even get? And I love the storytelling of Africa going, enough. We are going to be main players in an important story for us. And that very first Africa Climate Summit was extraordinary. To get that many leaders, heads of state, people who truly care about the climate, the environment, biodiversity, was breathtaking. Everybody wanted to be there. Everybody wanted to cover it. That was, we made an event. And that was a beautiful thing to see. There is Africa Climate Summit 2. It's quieter. So I'm concerned.
Okay.
You know, what will happen at the beginning of September? Can we continue that momentum? Or did we get the storytelling right because it was the first chapter and everybody was excited to be in that first chapter? What's happening for chapter 2?
I think that's a really interesting point in terms of, you know, going from Africa Climate Summit 1 to Climate Summit 2. And as a storyteller yourself, how do you think that we can sustain storytelling about African issues or issues that will impact the globe? But like Africans, for instance, you mentioned the farmers who saw all of this come and, you know, were not acknowledged at first. So how do we sustain that storytelling in order to really push for change? Because that, as a journalist myself, is something that we do struggle with. There's so many stories to cover. There's so many issues to dive deep on. There's so many things that we can look at as journalists and be under resourced, and not just journalists, you know, people in media and communications across the board. How do you think, in your opinion, we can sustain that storytelling so that, you know, there's no longer silence on these issues and action can happen?
I'm not going to be naive on this. It is very difficult. You have to continue to engage with the public. You have to engage with leaders. You have to find compelling stories to tell regularly. But whenever I'm diaspora, but I spend a lot of time on the African continent. Whenever I'm here, everyone has a story. Everyone has a story. So it's not that difficult, but finding the space on the, I would say, mainstream news agenda is very, very challenging because people don't necessarily want to hear about how food is produced, how we can produce food better, how we can improve food supply chains. But they do want to know it when it breaks down. So we want to know about the crises, but we don't want to know what happens every day to make things go smoothly. And I think that is on us as communicators, on sharing what we find exciting with the public and getting great stories to the public. There's no secret sauce to doing this. We have to continually be creative. It's possible, and I like the theme of this year's Africa Food Systems Forum, which is young people, because they will knock it out of the park. They are not jaded.
Very true.
They're telling the stories for the first time. So every story is fantastic. Every single one. They haven't yet got to the stage in their career where they've done the same. No, they've done the Africa Food Systems Forum 7 times already or 15 times already. And they're like, oh, what story am I going to tell now? Or we're on, Africa Climate Summit 17. What are we going to talk about now? So, but the freshness and the energy and the lack of cynicism is a really beautiful thing. And I think we should lean into young, not just young entrepreneurs, not just young farmers and agripreneurs, but also younger generation of media and, I'm going to say this, content makers, right?
Yeah.
Not even journalism, but content makers, because they know how to make some of the key issues that we're talking about engaging and important in a way that's accessible for a younger generation who eventually will become an older generation.
I also enjoy what you said about the Africa Climate Summit in the sense that it was the first time that everyone was looking at Africa, and we, in comparison to something like COP, we didn't have to fight tooth and nail for our seats at the table. We were like, we're going to make our own table. We're going to set it here, come eat. And I think that that's really stunning. And I think through young people, that's something that we can continue and that we can keep going with. And I think that's really, fully we need to tap into that.
Can I share something with you?
Of course.
And it's because I spend a lot of time in the diaspora. So I'm a lot of time trying to get into rooms, even as old as I am, getting into rooms, creating space for my peers, creating space for women of color, people of color. And somebody's that I really admire, he's a writer, and he's an African American, and he says to me, go where you're wanted, not where you're tolerated.
Ooh.
And that, I feel, works whatever we're talking about. Are we talking about sharing our successes, our challenges, our failures, what impact we can make on Africa food systems? Are we trying to get into places that we're tolerated, or shall we go where we're wanted and celebrated? It's always in my mind, and sometimes it means you have to do the work rather than trying to get into a space where people are like, okay, you can come in. Let's not fight for that. Let's fight for creating spaces where they're knocking on the door wanting to come in to our space.
Oh, I love that. And we're here talking about food systems and agriculture, but we don't talk enough about food for thought. And that was food for thought. That was nutritious. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna take that.
That was the
me.
broccoli.
That was the broccoli. That was actually, we ate our vegetables and then we can have our rice balls. But that was great. Thank you so much. So just diving into, the next parts of this discussion, and that is talking a little bit about your experience and how we can actually, shift narratives and shift focus since we've been been talking about, making sure that people look at Africa and really getting people to come to our table. In your opinion, as a member of the diaspora and with that experience, because we can't take for granted the experience that you did have trying to open up space in those rooms and being around those spaces. So how can we get international eyes on Africa's food systems and Africa's local storytellers? Because that's what what matters here, because those are the purest forms of the stories, the local food systems and those storytellers. From your experience as a storyteller, making waves abroad and beyond, how can we leverage those experiences and your knowledge to be able to get those eyes on our continent?
There is not one way, and there's not really a simple answer. I think it is mostly to not keep asking other people to tell our stories. I used to find that a lot, particularly when I was at CNN, in particular, because it was an era where CNN was like the most important international network and everybody watched CNN. It was before Al Jazeera existed, before France 24 existed. People were like used to the BBC. So the BBC has been there, but CNN was this shiny, amazing international network. And people would say, Femi, how do I get my story on CNN? How do we get onto CNN? And I always thought, why are we clamoring to be on an American TV network that cares? I'm going to be very careful about this, but the focus of CNN is the world through an American perspective.
Very true.
And I'm not even sure that my former colleagues even recognize that. And there is a certain sense of, I'm going to say hubris. It might not be the right word, but self-absorption that we all see when we cover a story. So we will say a flood impacts a certain country, and there were 300 people who perished, but 2 were British. 2 people die in mass flood disaster.
Yeah.
2 British people die in mad flood disaster. And we tell it from the perspective of let me just think. I'm just going to say from the perspective that the news network is coming from. And often it's where their headquarters are. So their headquarters are in Atlanta or New York, or their headquarters are in London, or their headquarters are in Doha. You get very different perspectives of how you see the world. And I always worried that we were giving our agency to other news networks that do not have as much passion about what we care about as we do, right?
Sure.
So I'm happy with, like, how do we, let's talk to Inside Africa, which I hosted for many years. It was like my baby. I loved this Inside Africa. Let's talk about to Inside Africa on CNN. Let's talk to maybe Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera. Let's see if we can get the stories on there, which is fine. I think that's good. But also we have to think about, who are the gatekeepers? How do we change that up? I think social media is very powerful. And sometimes a great video on social media does more than any story that you could put on for a minute and a half on CNN or BBC or Al Jazeera. So I think we just think about new ways of avoiding the traditional gatekeepers, because I don't think they have much more time left.
I do think that's true. I think that there's so much more that we can explore and dive into. And as someone who focuses on sustainable development in your reporting, which is something that I also, do myself. And I have a real struggle when it comes to, when you're looking at other sources and doing your research, and you find these other sources, when they look at Africa and Africa's issues, instead of seeing opportunities or seeing spaces where we can find solutions, it's not solutions journalism, really. It's very often pity.
It's crisis.
It's crisis.
Crisis.
It's crisis. It's, that's, too
It's
bad.
so terrible.
Yes.
The worst.
The
worst story.
It's so difficult to be able to be like, everywhere has crisis, but other places are focused on solutions. Whereas when you look at Africa, it's just like, oh no, we feel so bad for that place. Moving on.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to know, I know this is probably this is a left field question, but I wanted to know from your perspective, like, how do we challenge that pity? How do we challenge that side of the storytelling to be able to say, okay, there is a real issue here and a lot of people are being harmed or affected or impacted. But looking at it in the way of pity or shame, it makes it difficult to solve the issue. So how do we go towards solutions rather than to pity?
Well, one way you call it out, and thank goodness for social media, they can challenge headlines. Like, for instance, there might be a news agency. I'm not going to name names because it's happened with several different news agencies.
Yes.
And the way they write a story is obviously stereotypical. There's bias in that story headline or the way that story is constructed. And now the court of public opinion, they don't care. They're sitting on Instagram, they're sitting on X, and they're just like, well, you should rewrite that headline. The number of times that I've seen it rewritten, I was just like,
yeah,
I'm impressed.
amazing.
I'm impressed. So calling it out when you see it, when you see that bias, when you see the stagnant narrative, but also I feel like it's the more of us that are in the media space, the more we can give context. I'm not about fighting the narrative. I'm just about how do I talk about my continent in a way that is accurate, that has context, that is not poverty porn. It is not led by crisis. And I love being that disruptor. People sometimes call me an activist. I don't like that title because I'm a journalist, but I'm a journalist that has insight into my continent through my parents, through my love of traveling through Africa, having lived in different places. So I'm okay about challenging, but challenging with better, stronger, more powerful examples. And again, there are two people who give, I'm not sure if I should say this, but give no Fs, right? Two groups of people that give no Fs. Young people and old people.
Now that is an
You're
answer that I
young,
love.
I'm old. Between
Barely.
us.
Barely. Still fresh. We're just talking about the Senegalese glow that we have, please.
Yeah, so it's like intergenerational, getting that together. So you bring young people who care about agriculture, business, Africa food systems, supply chains. This sounds incredibly challenging in terms of being exciting.
Yeah.
But that newness, the fresh eyes, and then the older eyes, the wisdom. I'm about to moderate a panel on or plenary on the Council of the Wise, former here at the Africa Food Systems Forum, which are former heads of government who now no longer have to speak through the filter of their politics or the next election. So I'm waiting for them to unleash some great wisdom. And I'm pretty sure they give no Fs, right?
I love it.
I'm pretty sure.
I do love it. And I always say, like, my family thinks I'm ridiculous. My dream is to be an older person because I can't wait to, like...
Yes, I agree with your family.
Yeah. I know it's quite difficult to like think about it, but like it just, I can't imagine just like the wealth of knowledge through living. I mean, you have to live first to get the knowledge. And so I guess the real like direction I'm trying to go in is I really want to be able to gain that knowledge. And the way that you do it is to be able to change your perspectives, diversify your conversations with older people, with younger people, and find where...
And trying to work together. Sometimes it can be quite... there can be fault lines.
Yes.
Because you've got very digital savvy young people with older people who are just like, how do I put this app on my phone? Right? But you can kind of combine those skill sets.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot to be gained by that intergenerational collaboration.
1,000%. And I think that younger people should also take into consideration the experience and the knowledge that, has come with the advice that older people, the wisdom that older people are giving, because that will only that's how you transform.
Exactly.
Using that research, that experience, but also with your innovation and your creativity to speak to different audiences and do it differently. I'm not going to say better. I'm going to say differently because at the time when people who are older were younger, that was as better as it could get. So yes, I do agree that collaboration is so key. It's so important.
I want to give you an example of how it's worked, certainly for on our African continent, is that we've had a lot of young Africans who care about climate change, the environment, biodiversity,
Yes.
and they have revitalized that whole movement and the momentum and their determination for actually making change happen. And they've dragged the older people who are just like, oh, man, we've been trying this since the 60s. They're dragging them along on their younger backs and like, this is what we want. This is how we want it. And it's refreshing. It's exciting. And they revitalized an entire movement. And I know that same has happened within food systems and agriculture. And we have these young heroes and heroines, these amazing advocates that are all 100% made in Africa. I'm so proud of them.
Honestly, same. And I think it's because of, those who paved way, first and foremost, because now younger people are being told no less and less. They're being, they're kind of just going, well, why not?
Yeah.
Like, why not try and see? And that's something that a lot of people are tired of, like you were saying, like attending like the 70th, Africa Food System Summit, the 50th COP, a young person is going to be like, well, why not try this? I mean, it probably didn't work at that point, but we could try this in a different way. And that innovation is important. To wrap up this discussion today, and it's been such a great discussion, so thank you for being here with me. I wanted to ask you a little, question on behalf of the listeners. What's one thing that listeners, whether they're farmers or officials or youth communicators, what is one thing that they can try this week to tell a clearer story about food systems?
I would say everybody has a story, and it's really obvious as somebody who's a storyteller and works in an arena where it's all about narrative. When you meet somebody who has got a great story, how do you amplify it? What are you going to do? Don't say, oh, I never see this, I never hear this. Just share it. How do you do that? How do you share your platform with their platform, make that connection? And I think particularly with convenings like Africa Food Systems Forum, if you're watching online or if you're actually physically in that space, is sometimes you do, here's my QR code. I'm channeling into my younger self here. Here's my QR code. Slightly older people were like, do you have a business card? And we're like, oh man, gotta use the paper. But here's my QR code. And then what do? Right? Do something. Don't just go, oh, now it's sitting in wherever it's in my phone. It's like, do something. Make that extra step so that you are actually creating your own network. You're adding to your network and you're telling those stories, because those stories will then get passed along.
Deliciously put. Thank you so much for this conversation.
You're so welcome.
I know I've walked away. I'm pretty much like filled with knowledge at this point, and I have so much more to think about and to take home with me. And I hope you listeners also have a lot to take home with you. Consider what the food for thought is that you're going to walk away from this discussion with, and continue to tell those stories. We had another great discussion here on the AGRA Podcast. Stay tuned. Keep listening. There's some great guest hosts who aren't me, but are probably way more brilliant or just as brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a wonderful, wonderful day forward.